Chapter 22. Dre. Confession. Tonight was the night that would change his life forever. Dre fidgeted as he stood in front of a vibrantly purple door, stuck on the front of an otherwise dull farmhouse. Dre smiled. The color had been Asia's idea. This was not the first time he had stood there waiting for that door to open, but it was undoubtedly the most nerve-wracking. It was time for Dre to come clean, to tell Asia of his true feelings, of how he allowed his cowardice and fear to distance himself from her. It was time to confess his love. Asia had been resting ever since the incident. Healing potions were miraculously effective, but they were not without side effects, the most common being exhaustion and lethargy, the intensity of which depended largely on the quality of the potion, the vigor of the patient, and the severity of the injury. The thought brought a visceral image of Asia's limp, injured body, held in his arms, and a spark of fury rose within him. He shook his head and pushed the unwelcome emotion down. Now wasn't the time for such things. Asia had stayed at the healer's for a few days before returning home to rest. Dre had visited her every day, but with healer Norley checking in far more than was necessary, Adian stopping by to play restorative music, and her parents occasionally passing by to see if Asia was well enough to get back to work at the farm, they hadn't had the chance to truly talk. Not in the special way that he had really only ever experienced with Asia. Intimate, deep, and meaningful conversation, where Dre could be fully himself, without fear of judgment or recrimination. His thoughts were interrupted as the purple door was flung wide open. Dre jumped back in surprise and landed on weakened knees from the sight that was before him. Asia's usually wavy brown hair had been transformed into lush curls that cascaded down her shoulders. She wore a periwinkle blue dress with delicately embroidered flowers covering its length. It was snug at her torso and waist and then transitioned into a flowing river that ran from waist to ankle. Her movements in that dress were art in motion. Dre knew it had to be his mother's work, and some of her finest at that. He also knew that Asia and her parents could have never afforded it. It was a dress fit for a princess, and it fit her perfectly. Her face shone with an effortless beauty that many other women in Neridany tried and failed to replicate with coloring powders. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, her cheeks were flushed a rosy red, and her lips were curved into a knowing grin. A polished stone of dark blue hung from her neck on a leather cord, and a green stone bracelet of similar design was wrapped around her wrist. They were cute, simple pieces that didn't match the extravagance of the gown in the slightest, but the sight of them replaced his awestruck expression with a wide smile. They were not gems, but instead river rocks that Dre had found when he was a young boy. He had been struck by their beauty and had convinced his mother to help make them into jewelry. He could still clearly picture the look of pure exuberance on Asia's face when he had given them to her. She hadn't taken the things off for years, but as they grew older she had worn them less and less. Dre couldn't remember the last time he'd seen them on her. Now, however, they rested gently on her tanned skin, their natural beauty accentuating her own. Dre just stared and stared at her, far longer than socially acceptable, but he just couldn't stop himself. He had been suppressing his feelings for her for so long. Now that he allowed himself to truly see and appreciate her beauty, it was hard to breathe. "Is there something upon my face?" she asked him in an overly pompous voice, as she tried and failed to keep a serious expression. Dre raised an eyebrow in an exaggerated way and responded in his best Lord Kai impression. "Whatever do you mean, my lady?" "Well, you stare so fixedly that I can only assume that there is something reprehensible stuck to my face." "Well, considering some of the things that I've heard come out of it, I find your mouth to be quite reprehensible." Dre laughed as he dodged a smack delivered with fake outrage. He switched back into his regular tone and asked, "How are you feeling today?" Her smile faltered slightly. "I think I'm doing okay. It's just hard to imagine ever feeling normal again." She paused for a heartbeat, but then her smile returned. "I think I could get used to your new normal, though, as long as that fancy suit is part of it." Dre grinned and looked down at the dark blue suit that his father had just finished adjusting so that it fit his new physique. "What, this old thing?" They both laughed, and Dre held out his hand to Asia. She blushed slightly, but then took it, and the two of them began to walk together. It was a familiar trek that they had made countless times, but with everything that had happened, it felt so different. With his class decided and Asia by his side, it was so much easier to appreciate the little things. He reveled in the brilliantly blue sky, the cool breeze and nature's fresh aroma that wafted all around him. They walked together in companionable silence until Asya stopped. She turned and looked at him with intense, questioning eyes. What's going on, Dre? The letter invitation? The suit? Why so formal? Dre was transfixed by her gaze. With those piercing eyes, she must be able to see right through him. His heart began to race, and the sound of its pumping filled his ears. He felt a bead of sweat form on his brow. His head felt thick, his mind groggy. That's when he remembered to breathe again. He took a deep, tremulous breath. I need to apologize for the things that I said to you the day after I picked my class. It's okay, Dre. I know you didn't mean them. It's not okay. What I said was cruel, and I'm so sorry. You were only trying to help, and I lashed out at you, the person I care for most in the world, because I was so angry at myself, and I didn't know what to do about it. I still don't understand why you were so angry. From what I've heard, your class is great. Amazing, even, if I take your parents' word for it. Dre dropped his head. He stared at the ground. My class selection. It was unlike anything I've heard of. My memory of it fades as if every day is a year, but I thought I had made a terrible choice, a choice that would ruin my future. He slowly looked up and met her gaze. A choice that would ruin our future. Asia's expression froze, and her breathing quickened. But I don't understand. If you cared about me like that, if you cared about us, why have you kept pushing me away? Because I'm a coward. Just like you said after I picked my class. I was afraid that I wouldn't get a class worthy of you, that I couldn't provide the remarkable life that you want. But I don't really care about all that. I know that I talked about incredible wild futures when we were kids, but the only thing that really mattered to me in all those fantasies was that we were together. I know that now, and I think deep down I knew it back then, but I was scared that I would disappoint you, that I would trap you in a boring, useless life that you would come to resent, so I pushed you away. That's not fair, Dre. I can make my own choices. If I wanted to throw myself into the arms and life of a common laborer, then I would have every right to do so. There's more to life than the class you choose. So much more. I know, but now that I have a useful class, it doesn't really matter. No, you're wrong. It does matter because I don't love your class. I love you. And I always have. Dre's mind froze, and his heart all but stopped. He opened his mouth to tell her that he loved her too, but she held up a hand to stop him. I know that with the wide variety of patronage for your parents' store, you've always had a front row seat to the hierarchy of classes, but that doesn't matter to me. If you ended up spending your days toiling in a field, then I would be happy to spend mine right beside you. The words lifted a burden from Dre's heart that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Tears sprung unbidden to his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Instead, he stepped close and wrapped his arms around her. She lifted her flushed face. He bent slightly, and gently but firmly brought her rosy lips to his own. Dre got lost in the kiss. His arms grew tingly and his legs felt weak, but still he held her firm. The kiss wasn't his first. It wasn't even their first, not if you counted the quick pecks they had shared in their early teens. But this felt different, not just in magnitude, but in kind. He felt like a bird that had realized for the first time that it could fly. After countless frenzied heartbeats, they pulled away from each other. Asya gave him a shy smile. He responded with a huge, silly grin. They both laughed and started walking again, but this time Dre clasped her hand in his. You know, Asya said, glancing at Dre, you still haven't told me anything about your class. Dre frowned. What? Really? I feel like I've been talking everyone's ear off about it. Wait, you haven't asked me about it, have you? No, I haven't because, like I said, your class doesn't affect how I feel about you. Her serious expression morphed into a grin. Although I admit that I have been dying to ask you about it ever since I saw you marching out of town with that ridiculous pack on your back. Ridiculous, huh? For the thing that's kind of the focal point of my entire class, that's the descriptor you're going to use? Dre asked, mock offended. I speak nothing but the truth, Creator as my witness. Well, okay then. Seems like you aren't all that interested in my class after all, which works for me since I'm tired of talking about it anyways. Asya raised an eyebrow. Dre laughed. Yeah, you're right. I could talk about it all night. I am a Pac-Man, which you know, but what you don't know is that I'm already level 6. Dre paused and smiled at Asia's appropriately amazed expression. Fast, right? But it already seems to be slowing down. But what matters is that my whole class revolves around my pack, which magically stores way more in it than it should be able to, and also makes all the stuff in it way lighter than they should be. My class skills, so far, either improve my body or improve my pack, both of which allow me to carry an even more ridiculous amount of stuff on my back. He grinned at her. I'm hoping that such a convenience will make it easy for me to fit into any team. I get so excited thinking about my future adventuring team, and well, I guess the adventures we're going to have. He paused, and his expression hardened. The revenge that we will have to prepare for. He shook his head and pushed the anger down. Definitely not the time. He forced a smile. But I'm sure you want more class details, right? Asia didn't respond, so Dre shifted his attention away from the path and towards her, and was surprised to see an expression of shock on her suddenly pale face. Is everything all right? He asked, but then realized that he must have reminded her of the dungeon. He suppressed a groan. Sometimes he wished he could just sew his mouth shut. Was it something I said? His words seemed to break her out of her thoughts, but she still looked scared and startled for a couple heartbeats, before a smile returned to her lips. It wasn't the earnest smile of mere moments before, though, merely a passing imitation. She coughed and cleared her throat. It's fine. Everything's fine. Dre was thoroughly unconvinced by her words, but an unfamiliar noise drew his attention. Was that singing? The sounds grew louder until they crested a small hill and brightly colored flags, tied to an impromptu stage set up in the town square, became visible. Dre's heart soared at the sight. He turned to Asia, eyes gleaming. It's a traveling troupe. We haven't had one of those in ages. Yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it? She said, her smile still forced. Dre barely took notice, though, as a childlike exuberance bubbled within him. What luck! I was planning on us eating in the fox's lair, but I bet innkeeper Sorosa is serving those tables by the stage. Dre all but dragged Asia through the pieced-together gates guarded by an awkward-looking farm boy by the name of Bernal. As they approached the stage, where a man was juggling an inconceivable number of knives, one of the fox's lair's barmaids bustled over and offered them a colorful table before retreating to the inn to get them both dinner. Dre hurried to pull out Asia's chair for her before he seated himself. Again, though, the smile she gave him was half-hearted at best. Are you sure you're okay? You seem upset. Asia took a big breath and released a long sigh. I am fine, Dre. I swear. Please stop asking, she said, shifting into a dangerous tone that he recognized well from childhood, a tone that he had quickly learned to interpret as, shut up now, idiot. So Dre did, and they sat there in silence. Asia stared at the table and picked at some small imperfection, while Dre stared at her, ignoring the new performers on stage. What had gone wrong? Everything had been going so well. Perfect, even. Hadn't it? So why couldn't she even look at him now? Was it really because he had alluded to Tega? Maybe he just needed to bring up a light-hearted topic. Just as he was about to start up conversation, the barmaid returned with 2 large bowls of a delightfully aromatic pork stew. Dre's mouth watered, and he couldn't help but notice that Asia's smile seemed genuine as she thanked the woman. Maybe she was just hungry. Dre got angry and he was hungry sometimes too. Was there a word for that? Dre started digging in before the bowl had even come to a complete stop. The stew was just as delicious as it had smelled, but the heavy, awkward silence that hung over the two of them soured the flavor after only a few bites. Asia didn't even touch her spoon. Do you not like the food? I bet that if we ask, Sorosa will cook up something special for you, Dre said as he pushed down his annoyance at Asia's attitude. No, there's no need to bother her. I'm sure she's busy enough as it is. I'm just not that hungry. Really? But you're always hungry. Remember that time your mom chased you out of the house for asking what's for dinner while we were still finishing lunch? Asia smiled half-heartedly. Something was definitely wrong. That memory should have evoked a roar of laughter. Something's obviously wrong, Asia. Just tell me what it is, Dre said, frustration leaking into his tone as a man's voice started talking on stage. Her eyes flashed, but the fire faded quickly from her gaze. She sighed and her shoulders drooped. She opened her mouth to speak, closed it, and then opened it again, and words rushed out in a whispered shout. I don't really know, all right? Maybe it's because it's one thing to accept being the wife of a common laborer. It may be simple and at times lacking, but it's known. We would always have each other, No great worries, no great risks, just lots of small ones. Being the wife of an adventurer, though? That's a totally different beast to tame. I don't know if I'm prepared for the constant worries and the restless nights, knowing that you are intentionally throwing yourself into situations like the one that we both just barely survived. She paused and took a deep breath. Sure, there is a chance that you will find treasure. We'd become rich and rise up in the world. But the risk is so great, and my worries will never end. Your class, from what little I know of it, seems like it would be useful in so many endeavors that are less risky. You've already had a taste of the adventuring life. Why would you want more of it? Part of Dre had listened to and generally understood Asio's point, but that side of him was roughly shoved out of the way by his righteous indignation. I can't believe you! You just said that my class doesn't affect how you feel about me, yet now you are questioning how you feel entirely based on my class? That's totally unfair, Asia. It seems like you were expecting me to become a common laborer, despite what you always said. Maybe that's what you always wanted. Before a furious Asia had a chance to reply, a somber, eerie rhythm began to echo around the courtyard, one that Dre couldn't help but recognize. He turned to the stage and noticed for the first time that Adian was up there. He stood in the center of the platform, his guitar in his hands, and a pretty young woman with dark hair and a sour look on her face beside him. The music made Dre's hair stand on end. Adian caught his eye, and he gave a small, acknowledging nod before he began to sing. Moss is growing from his flesh, eyes bright emerald green. Both man and beast he does oppress, twist them till they're obscene. Stealth and wits he does possess, his powers grow unseen. Mothers, fathers do distress, he'll steal children for they wean. You haven't heard his name before, but soon it will be spread through lore. His face will taunt, his words will mock, the vicious soul-snatching Durak. An antler grows out from his head. He stands more than 8 feet tall. His arms are stained a rusty red, with too much lifeblood to recall. His defiled horde fills hearts with dread. Your dreams they will enthrall. Don't close your eyes, don't go to bed, or his nightmare may befall. You haven't heard his name before, but soon it will be spread through lore. His steps they shake the very ground, the only truly dungeon bound. His layers full of dragon's gold, uses its gleam for light. His halls are filled with beasts controlled, so raid planning on a fight. His rise may not have been foretold, seers were silenced by their fright. Don't enter into his stronghold, he'll make your pain his delight. You haven't heard his name before, but soon it will be spread through lore. His powers make us fear the spring. He's Schistostega, the death moss king. A deathly silence filled the courtyard, as the final eerie note became but a memory. It stayed like that until someone behind Dre began to clap. They were only joined by a few, but even still, the scattered applause broke Dre out of a kind of trance. At first, the song had filled him with terror and dread at the horrible memory, but as Adian had continued singing, his fear had slowly transformed into a fiery rage. The wrath he now felt was a burning inferno compared to the flickering flame of frustration he had felt toward Asya before the song began. His brother had to be stopped, and Dre had to become whatever was necessary to stop him. His breathing quickened, and he felt his face contort into a mask of fury. A small whimper from across the table managed to cut through the sounds of the now uncomfortably murmuring crowd. Dre's attention snapped to its originator, his face still full of terrible anger, only to meet Asya's horrified gaze. She fled, and as his overwhelming wrath consumed his sputtering empathy, Dre couldn't blame her.